with Rally Software. I'm going to be speaking on Agile Business this morning. I'm not using a microphone at the moment because I have a really loud voice. If you in the back can't hear me, I can use a microphone, but please use a test, sir. Can you hear me okay? Yeah? Everybody in the back okay? So I'm going to skip the microphone. I'm going to steer you of even a louder voice than this. So I'm going to talk today about business agility and how Agile principles apply in business. And there's multiple levels we look at that. But first, let me introduce myself. So I've been in the field of technology, working with technology, traditional methods, and Agile methods for nearly 2 decades. I've spent 7+ years doing Agile methods. I've worked in a number of areas. I come from the U.S., as you can probably tell, although I am actually located in Singapore currently. So I live not far from here. I've actually come to Bangkok and Thailand 7+ times. So I'm really happy to be speaking here. Love the country and always enjoy coming here. So glad to be able to join you guys and talk today about it. I founded practice in the U.S. area of Agile. I've worked for Accenture early in my career. You see a lot of certifications that I've done and my background in terms of education. But what I really want to do is give you the understanding of practice of how we do Agile, why we do it, and how it applies to business beyond applying only in the technology area where we know that certainly it does apply. You're going to hear a lot of excellent presentations on that today. What I would like to do is, oh, I'm really loud. I think I'm okay. Oh, the video won't be able to hear me? Oh. Okay, I really don't like these things. Okay, we'll try. How's that? Okay, so first let me see by a show of hands, how many of you are experienced with Agile, have used Agile in a project before, feel like you understand Agile to some degree? Can I see a show of hands? So I'd say the majority of the room. I'll probably go through a few little points here that I won't make the assumption everybody knows, but it seems for the most part that you know and have an idea of how Agile works as a basis. Let's take a look from a Rally perspective. We look at Agile in 3 contexts. We look at it from a business perspective. So from a business perspective is where we're going to talk today. We also look at it from a portfolio perspective, which is where companies are looking at the different projects and the different engagements that they have and how those things are going to be invested in, what budget you're going to spend on them, etc. And then we look at it from the execution perspective. Most of what you're going to see today in most of the sessions, not all, is going to be execution. So it's going to be Scrum, it might be Kanban, it might be XP practices, technical practices. So that's what we call execution. So what I'm going to speak about is business agility today. And then at the end, we'll come back and bring that back together. The basis of what I'm talking to you about today is based on a book by by Rally and by Bob Gower called Agile Business. We'll have copies of that with one of our partners, V-Link here in Thailand, along with our Rally software booth, which is outside there. And if you're interested in getting copies, I think we can get those to you. It's really a great read. I've actually got one sitting on the desk here. And it's got a lot of really interesting excerpts from our practicing coaches about their practice in different companies and different organizations. I think you'll find some really interesting pearls of wisdom, and they're short, so you don't have to spend all day reading every one. Okay? So let's take a look at this. How do you become an expert? Right? An expert, actually, building expertise, actually, my colleague here from ThoughtWorks was talking about in the last session how you actually continue in Agile to learn and you keep growing and keep building. That's a very key principle for us from an agility perspective. So the idea is down here, you drop out because you feel like I'm just not good at this and you let it go. A lot of people will work at this amateur level, which is that they are just consistently saying, I've done it this way, our business does it this way, I see no need to change it, we'll just keep doing it. And that's what we call kind of being an amateur. And then there's the idea of being an expert. There's always a way to get better, always a way to improve. We're always looking for feedback. We're always getting smarter and improving because of that. There's actually there's a book called Mindset, and it talks about 2 mindsets. One is what we call a growth mindset, and the growth mindset is a mindset where you're always looking and thinking, I can get smarter because I can learn more. I can always learn more, though I can get smarter. Agile is very much a growth mindset. The other mindset is one that we call a fixed mindset. A fixed mindset is one that says, I know everything I'm going to know. I'm as smart as I'm going to get. And therefore, if there's anything that I don't know, it's basically, it goes against my intelligence. I'm not smart because I got something wrong. I made a mistake. So I can't make any mistakes. Now that mindset does not work well with Agile. I will tell you that. You must have this idea of continuing to learn constantly. It's essential to being able to be successful with Agile in business and the technology domain as well. So what's this? Anyone know what that is? It's a train wreck, right? This is the way that projects often end up, right? So a project, we come out, we say we're going to spend 2 years, we're going to put $2 million, and we're going to do this project, and we're going to build something, and in the end, we hit 1 year and 6 months in, and we realize, it's not going to happen. Not going to happen. Let's put some more money in it, or everybody panics, but this is the way projects end up. So we want to figure out, how do we avoid this happening, right? How do we avoid this happening in our business, in the projects that we work on? So the usual things that we look at speed, right? We have to be able to get things done quickly and respond. We need predictability. We need to know, when is this going to be delivered? When is it going to get to the marketplace? Quality, which is really essential. A lot of times, we'll get things out. I remember there's a company that I worked with. I actually introduced Agile methods with them, and they would test all of their things in production. So they would take it. It was a SaaS platform, which is a cloud-based, basically. Users were on the SaaS platform, and they would just put things out, test it, it would break. So obviously, the customers were not happy. Quality is essential to whatever product you're building. Waste, which actually comes from lean principles, and lean principles align very closely with Agile. I won't get into that in this talk, but you'll hear about that from me in many other sessions. That principle of eliminating waste is core to Agile. You don't spend a lot of time building documents you don't need, working on things that nobody's ever going to look at. You work on the things that people care about and will use. And morale. Morale is very essential. And in fact, one of the most essential, if you look at my, the author of the Agile Business book, Bob Gower's comment, morale is actually at the core of it, because you can get people to work really hard on something, to produce something, but if the morale is terrible, even at the point that you get something to the market, people are going to leave because they're tired, they don't want to deal with you anymore, and they've had enough. And because the morale is poor, the company doesn't prosper, even though it could have. These are some Agile success stories that Rally has worked with. Telstra, they're in Australia. You can see some of the things that I think are really key to focus on here. And from a business perspective, 95% decrease in defects, 100% of projects delivered on time and on budget. I talked to a potential customer in Singapore several weeks back, and I asked him, he told me, well, why should I use Agile? Why should I use Agile methods? And I said, well, he said, is it any better? And I told him, well, think about the projects you've done in traditional or waterfall, and think about all the projects that you've done. Of all those projects, which are always supposed to come in on time, on budget, right? That's the key measure of a traditional project, on time. It doesn't have anything to do with quality or value delivered. It's just on time and on budget. Maybe something nobody ever uses, but it was on time, it was on budget. And I said, of those projects that you've done, how many have ever been on time and on budget? In reality, you didn't have to make a change request. You didn't have to change everything. All the scope that you'd expected was there, and the people were happy with it. And how many projects do you think he said in his traditional method in all the years, this is not a new guy, had actually achieved that goal? 0. And this is not coming from me. This is coming from somebody who was questioning whether Agile methods were useful or not. And he said, 0% of my projects have ever come in, completed, finished, as I said. So we get this illusion that you're doing this project, everything is going to line up perfectly, we've got the budget, it's just right, and now it's all going to happen. And what happens in reality is 16, 18 months down the road, everybody realizes we missed a few things, and it's not happening. Agile methods take into account the fact that we already know that's going to happen. Let's just prepare for it. BMC Software and John Deere, other things I'll just point out here, productivity up 20 to 50%, faster time to market 20%, employee engagement is up. This is the morale point that I talked about. The faster time to market is really important because if you're in a competitive business, which these days we almost all are, we need to get to market more quickly and with a product that people want to use than our competitors. If it's just us waiting and waiting and waiting. And traditional, I guess before internet time and before technology and things were really globalized, it was pretty easy to wait for a long time. You had a protected market. Nobody was really going to bother you in your market. If you were the incumbent player, you could just kind of sit and wait and not do anything much because you had time. That luxury is gone. People just don't have that luxury. Even if you're a government, honestly, people can go and choose to live somewhere else. these days in most places. So there is not really a sector that is protected from competition today. This is an elephant, very popular here in Thailand, very friendly and smart animals. And the story goes that there's 3 men walking on the street, and they come into contact with an elephant. They're 3 blind men, and the first one touches the tail and says, "Oh, it's a snake." That's what he thought it was. And the next guy touches the leg, and he says, "Oh, this is a tree trunk." Next one touches the trunk, etc., thinks it's something different. So the idea here is that Agile is like this elephant. There's a lot of different ways that you see it, a lot of different angles we come from. We want to try to describe for you this elephant that we call Agile, because there's a lot of different angles and perspectives from which we will view it. So in our Agile business book, and what I'm going to talk about this morning, we're going to look at building the right thing, building the thing right, people not resources, really important, Agile steering, and transforming your organization. So we're going to cover those, and I'm going to try to stop at certain points. If I go too fast, and I'm going to try to clarify at the end of each section, and we'll have Q&A at the end, hopefully to clarify as well. So let's first look at building the right thing. Our quote, "It doesn't matter how beautiful your theory is, it doesn't matter how smart you are, if it doesn't agree with experiment, it's wrong." Richard P. Feynman. Now what he's saying here is this. We had a talk, I was just listening earlier, about Aristotle and the scientific method. And the idea is that we do experiments, we test, we have a hypothesis, we see if they work. And if they don't work, so let's say that there was a company called TomTom that we've worked with in the past, and TomTom makes these GPS navigation systems, right? And they probably had this roadmap of all the new GPS navigation systems they're going to do for trucks and for boats and for everything else. But what happened was their business just took a dive. And the reason it took a dive is because, anybody have a guess as to why their business went like that? Smartphones, that's right. So the smartphone came in, everybody got free GPS navigation. They didn't need to buy this little device anymore. And so somebody in TomTom who was quite smart might have said, well, we've got this roadmap, this is what we're going to do. Everybody needs GPS navigation. And then they realized that, it doesn't agree with what's happening in the marketplace. Our stock is getting destroyed, and we're not doing well because what we expected to be what would happen is not. Our hypothesis about everybody needing GPS in all these different ways isn't happening. So what's being said here is that you really have to pay attention to your customer, pay attention to the market, not just the internal voice that is loudest or most eloquent. So what is this representing? When we build products, 20% of features are frequently used. Occasionally used, 16%, and rarely or never used is 64%. So what we see is that a lot of people spend way too much of their time on rarely or never used features. So they work really hard, and we're going to work weekends, and we're going to work nights, and we're going to work holidays, and they build this, and then nobody ever uses it, which is terrible for morale, by the way. What we should be doing is focusing on working on the things that people are frequently going to use. A good example of this is my mother-in-law back in the US in California. She has a Mercedes, this S-Class, but she loves this car, right? She always drives it. But the only things that she does in the car, she starts the car, so obviously she needs to drive it, and she uses the radio. There's navigation and comfort settings and everything else you can think of. For her, that's the 80% of things that she's never going to even look at. And if you spend all your time building for her, at least in a car, all of those features, she won't care. She will only care about the 20%. Just like when I use this PowerPoint presentation, I probably use about 20% of the features, and the rest I don't ever touch. They're nice. There's all kinds of word art I can use and effects, but I don't use them. So we need to focus on building the things that people will actually spend their time using. So in building the right thing, we need to do 3 things. And we start with releasing early and often, then starting with a vision and working with your customer. So releasing early and often does this for us. We see this area here. In traditional waterfall, we don't really get anything out to the marketplace for all this time. This could be quarters, right? So this could be a year and a half that we're looking at before anything gets to the market. And then again, let's say we do a second release. There's the PMBOK talks about, phase multiple release projects. Maybe we spend another, year releasing something else. And what happens is, in all that time, we're not realizing this value. I could have put something out in quarter one or in month one, and I could have started to get some value. Feedback from the customers, feedback from the market. I could have started to understand and get revenue. I could have started to realize revenue in my company. But instead, I'm spending all this time and not even understanding that maybe I'm TomTom and I come out to this point, I release my great GPS navigation and nobody wants it because the whole market's changed. Time is critical for us, and we need to make sure that we're realizing value as early as we can and often as we can. Another thing that we look at is the idea of value. When we spend time waiting for features to come out, there's value every time that we deliver something to the market. We learn, we're able to get better, we're able to respond better to the market, and we're realizing and capturing that value by releasing early and releasing often. And we also limit our risk, right? In a traditional project, when you use waterfall methods or you run your business in this way and you plan way up front and then you wait a long time to find the outcomes, your risk is not reduced if you kind of look at the traditional model until the very end, when you put something in the market and you've built pretty much everything and then you've tested it. But the problem is at that point, you may have missed so many things that it's impossible for you to avoid that train wreck we started with, right? You have missed so many points that it's unrecoverable. Where in Agile, what we're going to do is we're going to look at value and we're going to be reducing our risk every time that we release something to the marketplace. Now, we also want to start with a vision. And I like this next one. This comes from a TED Talk by Simon Sinek. And he talks about starting with why. Now, I like to use the example of computers and the computer market. You can see I'm using a Mac, although it's turned to the side. Right? I'm using a MacBook Pro. And what is talked about here is that Apple, for instance, is someone who starts with why. So Steve Jobs started with the idea of why he was building the product that he was building. Why was he doing it? And he wanted to build a great computer. He wanted to build something great to make people's lives easier. He determined how he was going to do that. It was going to be some type of technologies. He talked about having computers in everybody's home. People bought into the idea of what he was doing. And then he decided what he was going to build, which is going to be a really elegant, really easy to use technology. And then later he used the iPhone and other things. However, if you look at, so people line up to get Apple computers, right? They line up to get iPhones and line up to get those things. On the other hand, if you look at Dell or HP, they make PCs and computers. Basically, they start with what? So they start with the idea of what is it that we're going to build? We're going to build a computer. They build a computer, and they get basically the cheap components, and they put them in there. And are you going to line up all day and all night in order to get an HP computer? Are you going to line up all day and night in order to get a Dell computer? You don't. What you do is you go in, you get the cheapest one you can find. You spend the least amount of money possible, and that's it. And once you're done, you are not going to spend another penny. So the idea is that the power is starting with why. If your customer agrees with why you're doing it, they will invest, they will spend money, they will spend time, employees will commit. But if you don't, and you start with what, you end up being that commodity, like the low-cost computer that nobody's going to spend more money on. And then you have the idea of working with your customer. So when we did the book, Agile Business, we started with this empathy map, which talks about what is the customer thinking and feeling? What do they see? What do they say? What is it the customer is doing? What are they hearing? We want to understand where our customer is, what the customer wants, and what the customer is thinking about. And in doing that, we're able to better understand. A good example of this is work that I did with Disney some time ago. They're excellent about understanding who their customer is, who's going to be coming, segmenting very well who that marketplace is, and understanding exactly who will be using their product, which is the parks and the resorts that they have and their hotels and entertainment properties. They are excellent. I also worked with Adobe products before. It's amazing how they know by your going to their website or any other website that uses their product, they can tell you, are you left-handed or right-handed? Where are you located? What, is your demographic? Everything, it's amazing they know this with you providing almost no information. So knowing your customer is essential to being able to give them what it is that they're looking for. Now, when we start to know our customer, the first thing we need to have is a product owner. In Agile, you guys are familiar with this role. The product owner represents to the team, to the organization, who is it that our customer is. What do they want? What is the best return on investment that we're going to get? And we're going to get that return on investment by making sure that we're focused on the market. I'm sure that many of you have been on teams before, and you've been on a team where the whole team sits in a room by themselves, and they don't ask anybody outside of the room, what is the right thing to build? What is the right thing for us to spend our investment time in? They look to the smartest person, guy, lady, and that person says, you know what, I think we should do this. Everybody goes, you know what, you're really smart, let's do that. So everybody does that, but in all of that, nobody had ever talked to the customer. Nobody had went and looked at their marketplace. Nobody had went to understand what is it that we really need. And because of that, what we end up with is products that nobody uses. Spending that 64% and that 16%, getting that 80% that nobody uses, and they spend a lot of time building it, and it looks great, but nobody will ever buy it. Nobody will ever pay for it. And we want to avoid that. So the product owners are starting point in avoiding that happening. A great way that I like to describe Agile methods, and this really works beyond just the context of doing Agile in a team or doing a Scrum team, but throughout the organization, is cupcakes. So you have this idea of a large layer cake. That's the way we traditionally build a project. The large layer cake, big cake, we bake it, we spend our year. The idea is really getting this thing right, we bake it, and then when we're done, I can give you one slice of cake. Right? So I give you the slice of cake, and if you like it, which happens less than we would all like, that's great. We've got something. If you don't like that cake, the whole rest of that cake that I baked, I've wasted it. And because you said, I didn't want chocolate, I wanted red velvet, we're done. Now my whole project is out, people's careers are messed up, people are out of work because the project went the wrong way. And I've seen this happen more often than I'd like to account for. The idea with Agile is that you make a big, tasty dessert, and the way you build that big, tasty dessert is by building little cupcakes, right? So you take one cupcake, and in 1 month or a couple weeks, I give it to you, and I say, you like chocolate? You're like, you know what, I don't like that chocolate. I really wanted a lemon tart kind of cake. You're like, okay, no problem. I've spent 2 weeks. I can go back, and I can make another cupcake. I'm not going to have to end the whole company and every investment that we've made because I baked the wrong cake. It's a cupcake. Throw it out. Let's make another one. And so I make this big tasty dessert by making these small cupcakes. I can get value to the market quickly, and to me, this is something I'm pretty passionate about. So I've seen way too many projects and people badly impacted because the wrong decisions were made. Instead of spending the time building this big cake and wasting a lot of money on it, we could have made the small decisions and figured out if we were doing the right thing to start with. Very key principle. Nothing you remember from that section. Remember that. Now, we want to make sure that we build the thing right. We know we're building the right thing. We talk to our customer. How do we build the thing right? So you can't have great software without a great team. And most software teams behave like dysfunctional families. And unfortunately, this is often true, is that it's very hard for us to get that collaboration. We were talking earlier in the talk previously about collaboration, making sure that people are able to work together, essential in our teams working together. I remember an organization that I worked with, which will remain unnamed, but it was an entertainment organization. And their team, they were moving to Agile. I was working with them, coaching them. And they basically said, okay, the developers will be part of the Agile team. And we said, well, what about QA? What about the UX? What about the business analysts? What about them? They said, no, they're not part of the team. Just the developers. So, well, how can you just have the developers? The idea in Agile is that we have a cross-functional team. It means you have people from all areas. But the head of development, the director of development, was adamant that only developers would go. And then finally he gave in a little bit, and he said, you know what, they can come to the Scrum stand-up meetings, but they can't say anything. So they're pigs and chickens, if you guys know the story, right? And they said, everybody's a chicken unless you're a developer. So nobody was able to participate. That is not the idea of a cross-functional team. A cross-functional team is supposed to include members from all areas, and they're all part of the team. So it's key, not your title, but your role in the team, being part of that team, delivering value to the organization. The traditional mindset is that you don't deliver value. What you do is you just play your role, you build your widget, and once you've built your widget, you're done. It doesn't matter if it adds up to anything, you're just done. In Agile, we say we're delivering value. If you don't do something together that adds up to something valuable for our company and for our market, for our organization, then we're not doing what we should be doing. We're not building the thing right. A system that builds it right does several things. It pulls quality forward. I won't go into detail on all these. I'm happy to touch on them more in the QA session. It's going to have test automation, which means that we're able to include test-driven development and those types of practices very early, XP practices, continuous integration, which saves a lot of headaches, I will tell you that now. Teams own the quality, so they're not looking at somebody else saying, oh, throw it over the wall, somebody else will let me know if it works or not. The teams own the quality from the outset. They're responsible for building quality into the product. The people do the work, estimate the work. So you don't have somebody sitting in the project management office or elsewhere who is saying, oh, this is supposed to take you 2 years, and this will take you 6 months, and here's how much time you should spend on that task. The people who do the work estimate it. Now, mind you, I am not saying that that means that there's no role of project management. There actually are things that project or program managers, or whatever you want to call it, need to do in big, complex organizations and projects, but it's not telling the team exactly how much work they need to do. It's a servant leadership approach, which we'll talk about later. And a pull-based system where the team is pulling the work to themselves. Let's look at what that looks like. Right? So you have the work, and traditionally what happens is the work gets pushed onto a team. And they say, we can't handle this, we can't get this work out, and they go, work the weekend, work the evening. I remember I was working in one organization, we were doing it as a $1 billion program, it was a 500 people in the organization, and it actually was Agile. This was not the right way to do it all the way. But what happened was the VP said, you know what, we are going to work every evening, every weekend, until we get this out, but only until we get caught up, Now, for all of you who've been in business for some time, you know what that means. We never got caught up for 4.5 months. 5 months, everybody worked every weekend, every evening, because the work was pushed on them. This is what you need to do. This is what you need to do. That is not the way, from an Agile perspective, we want to do work. We want the work to be pulled by the team. They'll say, we can commit to, in the next 2 to 4 weeks, to do this. And then we commit. That doesn't mean the team gets away scot-free and they just do whatever they want. They are responsible for delivering that value at the end of the 2 to 4 weeks. And then in the next 2 to 4 weeks, more work is put in the backlog, and of course they can do more work, right? So the idea is that the team is pulling and it's not being pushed on them to do the work. Now let's take a look at people, not resources, which again I believe to be very important. For me, this is a familiar image. People in the organization ready and willing to do good work, wanting to contribute their ideas, ready to take responsibility, and leaders holding them back, insisting they wait for decisions or instructions. And this happens all together too much, even in organizations that I often see call themselves Agile. This is the mindset that is really critical, is that if we empower people and expect that they will do good work, we will see that as a product. If we don't empower people and instead expect that we've got to watch everything they do, we will get the opposite. People will always try to cut corners and they will act like you expect of them. If you're a parent, you may understand this with your kids as well. You know, kind of what you expect from them and the way that you respond to them is what they're going to respond to with you. So let's take a look at how this works. This comes from a simulation called Boyd's. It was by Craig Reynolds several years ago now. And what he did is he wanted to take a computer simulation to simulate the way that birds move. They move in these really complex when they're migrating and when they're, so they have big flocks of birds and you see them, you know, in the V shapes and how they move together, you know, and there's not really any leader out there going, okay, left, right, turn. So he said, how do they do it, right? And so he simulated it with a computer, and at first he thought, well, what you need to do is every single bird, you got to tell them, you move 2 points here, then you move to the right, then you stop here, then you turn. And tell everyone, and that did not work. It did not give you that kind of beautiful pattern you see with all these birds just migrating smoothly through the air, right? So it didn't work that way. And that's what we call micromanagement in business, right? You tell every person where they stand, how they turn, when they take a break, when they get back from the break, what they should be doing when they go on the break. What he found worked instead was this. He gave 3 simple instructions. 1, separation, avoid crowding. 2, alignment, steer with other birds. 3, cohesion, steer toward other birds. And these 3 instructions gave those patterns we're used to seeing with all these migratory birds in all these great patterns, not colliding with each other, moving. I'm sure this would probably apply also to a school of fish or any other group of things that are moving in that kind of a pattern. So what we find here is that actually it's the less instructions. It's giving the autonomy, in this case to the Boyd or the bird, for them to move that allowed them to complete these complex patterns and to be able to move in a very smooth and fluid way. And when we try to micromanage, when we try to tell everybody exactly what to do at every second of every day and what they should be doing, and if they don't do it, they need to find another job, all we're really doing is hurting our organization because we're not getting innovation. We're not, and that's actually when you see that business agility, you have to get all those levels we talked about, portfolio and execution need to work properly to get business agility, and to get business agility, that allows your organization to innovate, to be an innovative organization. It's harder, obviously, for an established organization than a startup, but it's certainly not impossible. It's something that can be done. I'm going to give another story here, which I like, which is about Bill Gates. And Bill Gates, you guys all know from Microsoft, I'm sure, all right? And so a brilliant man in terms of both business and technology. A great strategist, very sharp. He's a philanthropist now. He's not spending his time doing that. But when he was in the business, one of the things that he did is he would bring in the smartest people he could find. Because even though he was a very smart and is a very smart man, he knew that if I don't find very smart people to complement me, very smart people to bring other ideas that I may not have thought of, then they're going to go elsewhere and they're going to beat me in the marketplace and I'm going to be in trouble. So he'd bring them to work with him. That's the idea. Now some people think, well, the idea, you have one idea, but we say, from an Agile perspective, having an idea is a very dangerous thing if you only have one idea. You need many ideas to be able to successfully navigate. Agile managers, and they do exist, it's not a myth, they clear the way, they support people. So they help people to grow. They're not, and I'll give another story here. Let's see how we're doing on time, but I always love to include stories. So there was this, I blog on a blog called auspiciousagile.com. You saw the front. You can look at the story. It's called The Worst Agile Manager or Agile Boss I Ever Worked For. And I was working in a company that was transitioning to Agile, so kind of the mandate had gone through the organization, let's become Agile. And so the boss that I work for, he started doing daily stand-up meetings with our team. And this would be our stand-up. We would come in about 8 or 8:30 in the morning, nice and early. He'd get us all in the room, and he would say, what did you do? What did you do? If he didn't like your answer, he'd say, why'd you do that? And then he'd go to the next person and go, what did you do? Why did you do that? I remember one stand-up vividly where one of the team members, the only time I work in the business world, in 2 decades, that I've seen a grown man in a meeting crying. He broke down in tears because he couldn't take the interrogation. He didn't know what this guy wanted. He's afraid. This is what we call a fear-based manager. It is the opposite, the antithesis of what it means to be an Agile manager. It's just not the way you do it. It doesn't matter how many checklists and how much Scrum you do. If you got this guy or this lady doing management in this way, where it's just fear-based, you will never have a successful Agile team. I can just about guarantee it to you. Because it's the way the organization runs, it's just as essential as the practices that you do. Model Agile. So respect, openness, courage, simplicity, focus, and trust. And trust is essential. And it goes both ways. Again, I remember being in an organization where we had a leader for Agile coaches who was coming in to start Agile and bringing Agile into the organization. And what happened was, he basically came in and he said, oh, look, we got project management organization. And we sat in a meeting and no less words than this. And I remember I was working at the project management organization, working with them to try to adopt Agile in the project we were working on. And he said to them, oh, well, you guys won't be here anyway in 6 months was the idea. So he's like, you're all leaving. Now, does that have the idea of respect for people? I don't think it does. I don't think it's respectful of people. You might say we're transforming to Agile. You might be a good product owner. You might be good at looking at some of the business side. You might be looking at another role. Maybe you're kind of program oriented and you are going to help us with dependencies. Maybe you're going to be a good Scrum Master. But what I heard that guy say was about as un-Agile, if that's a word, as you could get. That's not respecting anybody. So that's not the way that you transform. I know there was another organization. It was a financial organization in the U.S. based out of Chicago. And they basically kicked everybody out from their project management office at one time because they were going to transform to Agile. Were they successful? I don't know. I doubt it. I didn't stay up on what happened with them. But the bottom line is that respect and that trust are really key components of being Agile. And servant leadership, right? It's key to be a servant leader. So a servant leader is what? It's someone who leads by serving and they serve by leading. Right? So the idea behind that is that you are serving through your leadership. You're not command and control, which is necessary in the military. There are certainly places for that, but when you're leading knowledge workers, and we had talked about Daniel Pink talk, that does not work well. It does not work well at all if you are going to try to demand people to do what you want because it's what you want to do. You need to have this servant leadership approach. Now, let's take a look at Agile steering. Everyone has a plan until they get punched in the mouth. I really love this quote. The more I read it, the more I like it, actually. Because what it tells you is this, is that you can go into the market, you can have everything lined up, you got pretty boxes and great marketing and good advertising and, good events, and you got the latest star, on all your, you got Jennifer Lopez or whoever it is, you got them out there and they're leading your campaigns. And you know what, though? As soon as you hit the market and you realize, what, this is not working the way we thought at all, you better change your plan or you're probably not going to be in business. It doesn't matter how great the plan is, you've got to do more than just have a plan. So this is the space shuttle. We don't fly these in the US anymore, but the space shuttle is on plan 3% of the time. The rest of the time it's steering, it's changing, it's adjusting, right? So it's on plan, as we call it, 3%. Steering is different than planning. There's nothing wrong with planning. Planning is valuable for seeing where you need to go. But the plan itself is not the value. It's the planning. It's the considering and understanding of where your market and your business place. The space shuttle is adjusting, and that's what steering is. We need to constantly steer because there are new forces that come up, new things that we didn't foresee, new adjustments and changes that we need to adapt to. So that steering is essential. Being able to steer is what we do in our portfolio, which I talked about a little bit earlier. And it's not just planning one time. Think about it this way, right? If you're in a car and you're driving your car, you got a plan for how you're going to go. And then let's say that you have really bad rain and the traffic gets terrible, which I think happened a few days ago here. And you have a couple choices at that point. You can stick with your plan, which will leave you in 3 hours of traffic and not getting anywhere you want to go anytime soon. Or you can steer, which means you can adjust around that and you can adapt. So the idea of steering is that you have to constantly make those adaptations. This is what we call the Agile planning onion. There's several versions that have different levels, but we typically at Rally use this 5 level. So we have the day level, the iteration, and the release. And usually what I see and what we see from a Rally perspective of organizations is that organizations will plan up to this release level, okay? So they'll go to the release level. What's the problem with that? It means that the executives, the leaders, the people who are planning budgets are still planning roadmap, which is vision or strategy. They're planning using traditional methods. So what happens is the teams are working, they're saying, okay, the product owner set up what the releases might look like. The teams know what their iteration looks like. They say, oh, we want to change scope, we need to adjust, we need to make some adjustments. Can they adjust? No, because up here, they're still planning in a waterfall way. What are they doing? They're saying, you have 2 years, 2 million, here's what we need, and you better give us that return at that time. You cannot adjust. So this is very frustrating. For leaders, it's frustrating because they say, well, why can't the Agile team deliver what we expect? And for the team, it's frustrating because they're trying to be Agile, but they can't be because they're constrained by the leadership. You need to have Agile planning all the way up to the roadmap and the product level with that steering, that ability to change and make adjustments. That's another discussion that I'll save for another time, but it's essential to be able to do that. This one, stop starting and start finishing. And the idea is here that you want to be able to get value into the market. Remember we talked about that? So you don't just keep on starting new things, getting this started, we're getting started on this. We want to actually push things through, finish them. And we finish them, we see value in the market, we see value in terms of feedback, we see value in terms of responses. Essential that we see that happening. And so that's the idea, is that we don't want to just keep things in flow. We want to get things all the way at the end. We want to finish them. Another one that I think is very interesting, this is the financials. So you got to think about financials. Some people say, oh, we're doing Agile. We don't think about funding and accounting and financials, but you have to because money is basically the way things that get measured. It's the way a business stays operating. So we've got to consider how that works. Here we look at the picture of a startup. This is kind of a typical Silicon Valley startup. And what they do is they have $500,000 they're going to burn through. Usually it's a little more than that, but let's say they raise $500,000. And they have developers, 5 developers, $100,000 each, and they basically have 12 months to either get something into the market. We said they need to finish, right? Get something in the market and realize some revenue, or they run out of money and go out of business. So you need to get things quickly into the marketplace, getting feedback, responding, and being able to respond to the markets. That is essential from an Agile perspective. Now, they could get another round of investment funding and another round, which does happen. I won't say it doesn't. But for most businesses, there comes a point of reality, a reality check, where you must start to realize some revenue, or you go out of business. And then, of course, as we're doing that planning, I showed you that 5 levels of planning, right? We also look at coming down. Planning is coming this way, but something else is going back up. There is feedback going back the other way. So not only are we planning, but feedback. You get feedback in the iteration, in the release, the planning pivot. And this idea of a pivot, what that is, it means that each time, this comes from design thinking and lean startup principles, right? So we can either pivot or persevere as we go through and we're trying something. We'll say, this is working really well. We'll persevere. We'll keep working on it. Or we were planning, we thought it was going to work this way, but it's not working. We're going to pivot. We're going to make an adjustment. We're not going to make that chocolate cupcake anymore. We're doing the red velvet because we need to make an adjustment. We're going to invest and fund something else because we don't see this working. So that's business agility, right? It's not being stuck in your plan. Another example that I use is in World War II, the British were going on D-Day, they were going to do an invasion, right? So they were all going to go to these beaches, but they actually found out from intelligence that the Germans were waiting for them at certain beaches. They knew they were coming. So you had if you had a plan, right, and you just said, planning, don't worry about the feedback, you go ahead, you would send all of your troops, all your soldiers onto these beaches knowing there was no chance that they were going to make it. Or you're going to pivot. And you're going to say, we better take another approach, we better attack other beaches, we better move and strategize to do it another way. So that's the idea, is you really have to take that feedback into your planning and adjust when you need to. This is the big picture of SAFE. I think that SAFE is very useful because what it shows you is that in an enterprise, not only do we have what we do at the team level, this is Agile, Scrum, XP methods, which are done at the team level, but it also shows you that you have programs where you have to align the things that are coming up from multiple of these. In SAFE, they call it a release train engineer who coordinates these. Some organizations may have program managers as well. The idea is that you have these program increments where you're able to deliver. You develop on a cadence, which means you develop at a certain pace, and you deliver on demand. So on demand, you deliver it. And then at the budgeting and portfolio level, you're budgeting using this portfolio Kanban, as we call it. And the portfolio Kanban is how you continue to do that very agile steering of what you're going to invest and put your money into. Now, SAFE is no more perfect than any other scaling platform. I think it is very comprehensive, though, and I like the idea that it shows the ideas and the principles that you need, and from my experience and many other Agile practitioners, to be able to actually scale this to the enterprise. Because if you only have a Scrum team, it's very hard to do these other things. How do you deal with legal, and how do you deal with your contracts, and how do you deal with the market outside, and how do you deal with other personnel, and how do you deal with programs and budgets? You have to deal with those things. And the idea that you can cover your eyes and not deal with them is not realistic. You have to. Now, let's look at transforming your organization. So this is urban blight. I believe this is a picture from Detroit, Michigan, in the United States. And the idea of urban blight is that you have this vicious cycle of crime and poverty that are just destroying things and getting worse and worse. And often teams with poor morale, writing bad code, delivering poor work, it's the same thing. It's this vicious cycle of poor morale just devolving and going down and down and down. The other picture we have here is of an organic farm where you have this virtuous cycle, as Bob Gower called it, of everything building up and up and up. So you have a good clean food supply and clean water that's leading to a clean food supply that's getting better, and it's continuing to improve, and it's good for the environment around it, and it keeps getting better. And that's what we're looking for in our organizations, is the changes and the things that we do make this virtuous cycle of things improving constantly. So you make a small change, an adjustment, you see how it works, that experiment, right, and you try again, and then you adjust again. We call it inspecting, adapting, or retrospecting in Agile, right? And we're constantly looking at how to improve it, how to get it better, right? We're always learning. And of course, you have to deal with complexity, because in organizations, unless you're two people working in a garage somewhere, there's always, and even then you might not agree, frankly, but there's always complexity. What's happening in the market over here? We're working in this other country, and something just happened with the laws there. Now the marketplace, another competitor just came in. Oh, Google is now taking payments, and in China, Alibaba is doing the same. What do we do with this? We're a bank. How do we deal with that? There's constant complexity. And so being able to deal with complexity, called a VUCA world, which is volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity, right? That is the world we live in today. It's a fact of the matter, and Agile actually helps you to respond to that. Agility helps you to be able to respond when those inputs come in and you don't know what to do. You adjust, you respond, you have the ability to deal with complexity. And and we should definitely not underestimate the impacts of complexity in our business and work. So how do you get started? What do? You pick a value stream, look at that, draw a circle, get started, and inspect and adapt, or as we call it, we retrospect. So your value stream, this is an org chart, right? It's not necessarily always going to be in one part of the organization. Oh, well, it's this org, and that's the value. The value stream may actually look more like this, right? It may cross several areas of the organization to deliver something valuable to the marketplace. You know, maybe you make hardware, and you need to have certain software, certain hardware components, certain other things for your marketing, and all those things come together to produce the product or the value. So it's not just about an org chart. A lot of people ask me, oh, well, you know, how do I change the org chart? How do I change the roles and structure? Well, that's okay, but that's not really what's going to produce the results in Agile for you. It is that you actually look at the value that you're going to deliver and find how to start delivering that value, not that you change your org chart. So to go Agile, as we said, we pick a value stream, we draw a circle, we get started, and very key, don't forget number 4, you inspect and adapt. Okay? So how to be an expert? Always a better way to do it. That is the Agile approach. These come from the Agile Business Book. Again, you can talk to Rally Software out here and our local partner V-Link as well. They can give you some copies of this. And we talked about the business agility, the portfolio agility we talked about a little bit. I did not get into execution agility. A lot of other sessions will. Scrum, they're going to talk about XP practices, technical practices, some scaling as well. Safe, other practices, less. But this is what we covered, and what I'd like to do now is stop and take it to questions, I believe. We have 15 minutes that we open up for questions. Thank you.
Question. So one of the key takeaway to me is like you suggest to release early and often, but maybe in the large enterprise there's some certain degree of bureaucracy. So in order to release something, they will have review before they release. And that implies if we release very often, then we will spend maybe quite a bit of overhead for the review process. So do you have any experience for working in the large enterprise? And how do you deal with this issue?
So releasing early and often in a large enterprise? Yeah, so the way that works, I'm actually going to go back to that big picture we were looking at earlier from SAFE. I think it was only a few slides back, hopefully. Okay. So the way that we release early and often in a large enterprise is no different than the way we do it in a small organization, right? What SAFE does and what most of the scaling practices for Agile do in large enterprises is they take what we call fractals. They take a small picture of how you do this in a team level, and then they scale it up. So this release train engineer here is actually what we call Uber Scrum Master. He's a Scrum Master who covers everything, and he's covering all these teams and working with them, but all you're doing is just scaling up the team at a program level. And again, we're using the same principles of, in our funding, in that Kanban, same Agile principles are being applied there. So what we're doing is we're taking, and so actually there's a very good drawing or picture. We're going to see, not sure if you guys are going to be able to see on this board, if we have enough light. We'll give it a try, right? So if you're going to adopt Agile and have an unsealed marker, all right, well, looks like these are not open. I'll just describe it to you. What basically happens is you have to start with adoption at the team level, right? If team level adoption is not there and you don't have good practices at team level, then it's not going to be possible for you to scale this to a program, because you can't do something well at the program level that you couldn't even do at the team level, right? And then in order for you to have an Agile business or Agile enterprise and innovation and continuous improvement, you have to be able to do this. You have to run your programs. If you have larger programs, you have to have your teams all running in this way and being able to work in an Agile way. And when that happens, then you will be able to apply these principles to innovate, to be able to have that pull-driven system and that flow of continuous flow, right? Which is what's happened at the top level here. And that allows you to respond to the market, because the market changes, you change, you adapt. And you're able to apply that at all the different levels. Certainly SAFE is not the only way to do this, but I think it gives a good example of those fractals. You've got to start at the team level. You need to apply that in a sound way first, have the right leadership, servant leadership, and then scale it up. Did that answer your question? Okay. Yes.
I have a question about the planning. So you talked earlier about the product planning, where normally customer will pay you like $2 million, and then I want to have these features in 2 years. And you say that this is not the right way to do it. So in Agile, what is the way that we should do?
For planning. Yeah. So let's go back to that planning onion, which I think I had back a few more slides back here. Right. So when you do planning from an Agile perspective, right, you're looking at vision, because one mistake I think organizations make is that they will make their Agile teams stuck under traditional planning where there's no ability to change. Another mistake that I see is that from an Agile organization, all that gets planned is an iteration or two. We kind of sometimes wave planning, look at the next few iterations or sprints, and nothing else gets planned, which means that nobody really has kind of this vision of where does it need to go, where are we going. It's very important to have that level of planning that we call the vision planning, right? Because that says, you know, we're building, you know, whatever it is, the iPhone, we're building the MacBook Air, and, you know, we know this is the products that we're looking to try to build, and then we have a roadmap of those. So we're going to have, you know, lighter with new features that are going to come out. Now those features can change. They can adapt in the releases, right? So we know we're planning at that level. You know, we thought we were going to spend a lot more time working on making it thinner and bigger, but we realize now that people really like this phablet-sized phone where, you know, we're going to expand it a little bit, so we're going to change the features and the software and the way that it looks. So we're looking at our roadmap and our releases align with that. And so we're looking at all levels of planning. And the iterations, of course, are going to take the things that we've been planning in our roadmap, and they're going to take them in features, and they're going to break those stories down. They're going to start working on them and releasing them. But if things adapt, if things change again, and Samsung and Galaxy comes along, you're going to be able to respond to that because, you know what? We're going to change the key features at the release level and the roadmap that we're looking at, and we're going to maybe change our next upcoming releases. So it's really key to plan at all of these levels instead of only planning for your iterations. Now, as I said, as a gentleman back here had asked me before, when you first start Agile, absolutely you're going to do iterations and team level planning. And that may be all you do to start. But you can't let that be the end of your journey. Your journey has to continue to being able to adapt in your whole organization to be able to respond and do planning at all levels, not just iteration and then even release.
But the question is, if I have a customer and I'm going to pay like $2 million, how can I make sure that I get the product? Because that's a question that is asked a lot.
So if this, you're talking about, let's say that you're paying somebody, a vendor.
Yes.
Okay, and that vendor says, you know, we're using Agile. How do I make sure that I'm going to get what I expect? So different discussion, but it's an interesting one as well. There's quite a few models that you can use for funding. I did a talk about at Agile Singapore about Agile project management, which is a whole different talk, but there's different funding models that you can use. So you can use kind of a fixed price model. You understand how many people are on your team, which tells you what your burn or your spend is going to be, right? Because you know that you have a 2-week iteration or a month-long iteration, 4 weeks, and you know that you cost, you know, the team members you have, it costs you $100,000 to do one iteration, right? Now, if you're working with somebody, let's say they say, okay, it's going to be 2 years, you know, is our contract, and you're going to deliver a certain number of features, whatever it might be. Now, the risk is on them in a fixed price, fixed bid, because they need to use that information they have about their velocity, which will tell them how much they can build and how much it costs them to build it. And so if you know how many people are on your team, how much time, what your iteration is, and what your velocity is, how much you get done in every iteration. Now, let's say I'm your vendor. I'm going to say, you know what? I know that if I estimate at 500,000, you know, I've got a high likelihood of getting it all done, but maybe it's more than you want to spend. If I estimate at 250,000, that's the low end of where I could deliver those features for you. You know, you've seen that kind of risk, you know, line of where you're able to deliver certain features. And if I, you know, bid my average, you know, velocity, and my average velocity about 350,000. So I might decide, you know what, I'm going to give myself a little wiggle room. I'm going to bid at 400,000, but obviously I'm taking the risk now because it's a fixed bid, right? You're not taking the risk. All you're doing is paying me. I'm responsible. And if it goes over, so be it, right? I have to deal with that. But I am mitigating my risk because I know my velocity. I know my team sizes. That's why you don't keep on changing your team sizes, because it's hard to maintain velocity understanding, right? Now, there's other models you can use as well. We have one where you're able to do incremental. So, you know, you could just pay for the next increment, right, with your vendor. Now, this is a little more advanced than just doing a fix. If you're doing internal, you can do a traditional big upfront estimate based on those same numbers I gave you. So there's a lot of ways you can do it. But for your vendor, you can do the same fixed bid if you want. As long as they really are using agile methods, they can predict that. They know their best, their worst case, and their most likely case. And they can bid with you based on that.
Any tell ROI on the user story base? Can you share with us how could you define the ROI for each user story?
What is user story?
The ROI return on investment on the user story base.
On the hours?
On the user story base.
Yep. So I'm not sure if I'm getting the whole question. So I know from user story, you're saying that you want to look in terms of how we estimate and how we use them in the model of our estimating?
Really, it's the return on investment on that user story.
Oh, the return on investment for a user story. Okay. The return on investment for a user story, it's not, there's definitely no exact science to that, right? You may get more likely a return on investment on a feature. A user story is a very granular level, right? Let's say that we're building that phone I was talking about, and one of your stories is to have, the SMS text capability, and you need to have certain other apps, you need to have the larger screen size available to you. And let's say, so you're doing a product and software, so you have certain things that need to be built. Each one is a story. It's potentially shippable, right? You could potentially release with just, the larger screen size with no apps and no SMS capability, nothing else. But it's not practical, right? So you're not really going to necessarily get a return on investment just because you did a story. Now, if you do features, you could probably get a return on investment on your features. Maybe you develop the phone and you put it out with the rounded corners and the phablet sizing and the SMS, and so you've got certain features and you can look and say, now I can put those in the market. But it's going to be very hard to do a return on investment unless you get something into the market, right? So if you only get a potentially shippable and it doesn't make business sense for you to actually ship it, then you can't really do return on investment calculation easily. Once you get to the feature level, I think it's more likely at that point, then you could get a response, right? A feature is usually made up of multiple stories. And once you put that into the marketplace, now you're going to get dollars, or you're going to get bought, and you're going to understand how much you're getting paid for it, and therefore you can start to look at return. But you really can't be only looking at the iteration, which is based on user stories. It's more the release, which is features. That's where your ROI is most likely to be calculated. Value-based, that's right. So user stories, you are going to look at value, right? You're going to look and say, what is the value for us in a story? Sometimes the product owner will assign a business value to a story. In SAFe, they actually assign it at the feature level as well. But you will assign value. That value may or may not actually be true dollars. It could be some other unit of measure, unit of value measure that you have for your business. It could be increased name recognition. It could be, better quality of perception of your brand. There's a lot of things that could be value, right? It may not be actual dollars. So you may not be able to measure it as return on investment, but you can still find some value and associate it with the story. So that is a more likely scenario. But your story return on investment will probably be at the feature level in the releases. Yes?
At some point you mentioned that as a team you have to commit to how many story points you can deliver within the iterations. And what if your commitment is wrong and you cannot actually deliver it within that iteration? Does it mean you have to do the overtime or you don't deliver it?
Yeah, so if you're working that organization I talked about with the VP, you said we're going to keep on working until we catch up, you do overtime. That is not suggested in an Agile context. What we want to do is be sustainable, right? We want to do something where we can continue working, people don't burn out, they don't get exhausted and tired of working, and they want to just get out of there. So if you don't make it, let's say that you thought you were going to hit 100 points, story points, and it ends up that you only deliver 75 or 80 in the stories you're able to complete. A few things you can do, right? If you're coming up to the end of it and you're not at the end of the iteration yet, you could work with your product owner and say, you know what? I don't think we're going to get all of it. Let me know what are the most important ones. We'll try to get those. The next ones we'll have to push into the next iteration or sprint, right? So you could do that. Another thing that you could do is you could say, we're just going to have to learn from this. We understand that we didn't hit the target because, from an Agile perspective, we don't use that to beat up the team and say, you didn't make 100. You should have made 100. Why didn't you make 100? We're going to punish you. We're not going to do that. Over time, what you're going to see is one time they might make 120, one time they might make 70 points, next time they might make 100. Over time, you're going to get that average. That's why we were talking about the gentleman's question here, the estimate. How do you estimate it? Because you're going to get an average velocity. You're going to start to understand. in the first 2-3 sprints, it's going to be very hard for you to really know. You know, some methods will say take like an idea of a certain number of points per person on your team or whatever it is, but until you've got consistent teams, until you've got the same, you know, understanding of velocity over several iterations or sprints, it's hard for you to get that correct every time. And that's why, and I'm actually going to tell this other story to partly answer your question, it's really important to keep your teams together and to value and respect the people on your teams, because you can't get the velocity and the information you need if you don't. There was an organization that I was working with, and the director there, he was great. He was, you know, he really was gung-ho. He loved Agile. He was working to support Agile. He wanted to get it going in his organization. The one thing that he did, though, that really hurt our teams was that he spent his whole day, you know, he's kind of like a kid, right? And I'll finish the story and I'll stop. I see you over there. And he would go around just dealing with everybody. We call it horse trading, about who on a team he was going to take and put in another project. I'm going to take this person, put them here. I'm going to take this person, I'm going to put them there. And it was really bad for morale. There was one person, we'll call her Sarah, and I think that she may well have just quit because she was really upset about just being pulled out and moved. But not only is that bad for morale in your teams, it's also bad because you can't plan velocity. You keep switching your teams. They start working well together, and then you change them up. So that's the key. Keep them together. You're going to get differences in velocity, but over time, you're going to get a pretty good idea of where you are. You know, plan for holidays and vacations and other things as well. And don't worry about it if one spread is not where you think it's going to be. Okay, I think I'm out of time. Thank you. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you. So yes, let them have a feedback.